maybe you all would. I'll show a few demonstration projects, just sort of case studies, and then we hope to actually get you guys with some materials in your hands and have a little fun making some parts. So that will happen as soon as Gustavo's here. Why don't you come on over here? Come on over here if you're through with your breakfasts, and come a little closer. I want to show one particular case study, that kind of demonstrates all the different aspects of the things that we do. Can I leave that there? Will that work? Come on in. I have little pictures, so you have to come in close so I can see. So this project is sort of a once in a career project, but it demonstrates all the things that go into that I'm going to talk about today. This is what it looked like in 1926, Thomas Lamb lobby for the Ohio Theater in Cleveland, at the Playhouse Square. There was a fire in 1965, and this lobby was completely destroyed, gone. And that's what they put in its place. It looks like a bed mall or something like that, right? And some philanthropist came forward and said, "What would it take to rebuild that lobby?" And we're like, "Yeah." And so we began our research, and we found little bits and pieces above the drop ceiling. The ceiling was completely gone, and all we have here, the ornament has popped off, but you have the silhouette of the ornament. So we could tell by looking at that what the dimensions were, what the arc of the ceiling was, and we were able to take some molds, and very interestingly, and one of the significant things about making any plastic material is that there's a kind of vocabulary, a grammar to the ornament, how deep the cuts are, how shallow the relief is, how the light is reflected off of it. And it's very important, if you work on many, many hundreds of projects, to understand this language so that you don't put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. And when you see somebody who doesn't understand the style that you're working in, it's very apparent, because there's not a harmony, there's not a balance. So by looking at pieces of the original, we're able to understand. And this is what we're able to. And by the way, this is the ceiling that had been thrown down inside of the cavity of the wall, where we were able just to retrieve these little pieces, this big, but they told us what the depth of the ornament was. You could see the tool marks of the original artist. So from that, we could reconstruct the entire piece. And here we are taking a few molds from the extant pieces, and Gustavo here's Gustavo. And Gustavo will demonstrate some of the techniques that we use, but here we are doing an in situ mold. This is the master mold, and then we make a mother mold behind it. Here's an example and we will get to pour this today. Somebody gets to pour this today. So there's an original positive piece. We do what we call a smooth-on mold or an in situ mold. Then, since this is flexible so that we can pull the mold out, we need to make what we call the mother mold, the rigid mold, behind that. And somebody will get to pour a few pieces today. So we understand we were very lucky because of the Avery Library at Columbia. We have Thomas Lamb's original blueprints, so we know what the layout was. And in our research, we found that he had stolen this design, not stolen, borrowed, lifted, inspired by the Adams brothers' Scion House in Dorchester, outside of London.
Very quick. You wouldn't mind if you also show the photos to the
Ah, sure, absolutely. There we go. Good. So we were able to find his inspiration and really understand what he was trying to do in terms of color and other things. So what did we do? We sculpted the missing ornaments. We made molds out of them. And I'll talk a little bit about the process. Anybody like to play with clay? And by the way, we have someone in our audience today. Where did Adam go? Here he is. Adam Thorpe is a master carver and probably knows more about ornament than anybody I've ever met. Is that? I hope I'm not setting you too. And so come on over here and show them how easy it is to take a blob of clay. These are my tools, by the way. You can use any ones that you want. Would anybody else like to play with some clay? So this is where we start with just a blob of clay. No other volunteers. There we go. And grab anything you want. So these are all sculpting tools.
Yeah.
Putting them on the spot.
You're right. I'm kidding.
Anyway, what you have in your hands, we turn into something like this. All right. So we sculpt it. That's where we start. And then let's see what he does here. And then we make here we are sculpting the clay, make the mold, cast the parts, and then I'm going to jump forward here quickly. And in this case, we came up with a rather innovative system for hanging it. So, and I'll talk about how things are installed in a minute. But in this case, we worked out all of the, and it's very difficult because we have shallow curves on diagonal dimensions, right? So we had to basically create a template for the ceiling and then translate that all to computers. And remember that all these ceilings were built, it was pure analog mind, not digital mind, sheer common sense, like a shipwright, building a ceiling with a shallow curve with diagonal angles and figuring out how all those pieces came together. And what we did is we put a glue board behind, and we put sheet metal behind that so that we could fasten all of these pieces with screws, mechanically fasten them, which is different than the original was done. What they would have done in the original, I'm going to jump forward here, is to take the cast pieces and put what we call plaster wads on them with some type of reinforcement, hessian, shredded wood, a burlap. We use fiberglass now so that it doesn't rot. And actually, we also worked with you on the Fox Theater, which we forgot to mention, which was a case of reinforcing all of the fixings from behind the ceiling due to water. So, but in this case, what we did is kit of parts. Gustavo made many of these parts out here in California and shipped them to Ohio, and then simply, installed them. And the way that we designed it, originally they would have done a flat 3-coat plaster and then stuck all this ornament to it. And instead, we cast them in large pieces out of GFRG. So once you make the mold, you can cast out of traditional plaster, which is calcium sulfite, gypsum, or you can use modern materials, glass reinforced gypsum, which is a very hard setting, high tensile strength type of plaster, which we put chopped fiberglass in, so we get a very, very thin set, and you can build large pieces, which are very lightweight. So, and we designed it in such a way that these guilloche beams could fit over the pieces and hide all the joints. And that minimized what we call the pointing, which is where you have to go back and fill in all the joints. So we're combining traditional techniques and modern applications to inform restoration of historic buildings. With the same material, yes. So while he's making something, and what I thought we'd do is go ahead and do some casting. And if anybody's interested, do we have any volunteers who would like to pour some plaster? Come on over here. So, and actually, Gustavo, we can do this one. I think this, we have to choose things that'll set up pretty fast since we only have 1 hour. This one, and this one. Yeah. Okay. Any others that you want to do? Some small. Do we have some others? So maybe 3 or 4 volunteers who want to pour some plaster. We'll see how easy it is. Okay. Come on up. And choose. Each of you all can choose a mold that you'd like to make, because you're going to get to take this home, by the way. Right. So. And you might want to wear some gloves because the plaster is very opulent and will dry your hands out. Come on in. Come on in. There's many ways to make plaster. These are knives that are cut to do run moldings. We have a couple different knives here. So what we'll do is we'll take a profile of the molding, cut a piece of metal, and then we put this in a sled, or sometimes we call it a horse, and we'll run the molding. We can run it on the table, or we can actually run it in place. And for complex jobs, let's say if you're running a dome, or the oculus of a dome, you'll actually set up a beam, and it's wonderful. Or if you're spinning a dome, a small dome, or even a large dome, let's say niche, it's amazing to see this technique where you're spinning an entire dome. All right, so there's a lot of sort of I don't want to call it craft knowledge, but it's common sense. It's like it's like a master carpenter. To be a master plasterer, you have to have a lot of skills in your toolkit. So and there's an example. I'll just show you a better example. So here's one that's you can see. So what you would do is you take your wet plaster, you throw it down on the table, and you run this back and forth until you get that. And what we do to minimize the weight, I'm going to tell you all the tricks here. There's a piece of we put a piece of foam back here so that we don't have a solid piece. Historically, they would have made this out of a solid piece. It would have been quite heavy. Now we're making them much more light. And as I said, and how they would have hung this if it were a solid piece is they would have buttered the back of it with plaster and just stuck plaster to plaster, and that would be it. And I'll tell you why we don't do that anymore. I'll give you some examples of where pieces of plaster have fallen. All right, and we go back and repair them. And in point of fact, now in England they have I think it's called Article 20, where they have to go back after that terrible incident in London where the ceiling fell during a performance. They have to go back and inspect the ceilings once a year with an engineer and a plaster expert. And I think it would be also a good notion in this country to check how this, have some standards for how plaster performs over a long period of time. So, do we bring any hemp or hessian or any reinforcing material?
I did, but there's one of the things that I didn't write it out.
Okay, that's all right. So to make a distinction when we talk about plaster, there's what I'll call three-coat plaster, flat wall.
The fabric in the back with some burlap in it.
Good. There's three-coat plaster, which is calcium carbonate, lime, usually gauged with gypsum, and there are many different variations on this. That's one type of plaster, but we're talking about casting materials today. We're talking about gypsum plaster and its various forms. And modern plaster, you can put all kinds of additives, polymers, Forton. You can add things to the plaster or use different types of materials to cast from, bonded bronze. So there's a whole range of materials now which have more polymer in them, and they're both cementitious, but they have other materials which add either strength or setting time or make them waterproof. I'll give an example here. Oh God, this is heavy. For that project I showed you in Cleveland, there was Scaiola balusters and a stair, and we went and cast it out of, this is GFRC, glass reinforced concrete, which has been polished to look like marble, and it's quite heavy. And that piece, and there you see the foam on the inside, which is supposed to lighten it up, and this piece here.
If you want to wear a mask, I'm just going to try to wear it. What I'm doing is the process, soaking the plaster. So it's always a good idea to, well, it's not a good idea. You have to do it by, if you want the plaster to set up, you cannot mix the plaster and stir it as you pour it because you activate the plaster. So you always have to start doing this process, what we call is soaking the plaster.
And you want to use cold water. Hot water will cause it to set faster. And actually, as it's setting, it gives off heat. So when you pour these and you take it out, you'll feel that the plaster is actually hot. That's the chemical reaction. And the difference, just to differentiate between what I'll call three-coat plaster, lime plaster, which dries by a process of carbonization with oxygen in the air, gypsum, which sets very fast. We have probably, what, 20 minutes, maybe 15 minutes?
Yes. This one is 30 minutes. So 30. As every application, as a worker, you want to see which plaster works better for you. Want to do like, for example, we run a piece by hand, so you want more time in, so you buy plaster that is set in longer time. You have, for casting, you have 15 minutes, 20 minutes, but when you're in this process, running the knife and you tape or doing that part of the work, you want more time on your side. So. And
there are tricks that you can do. You can add lime, aged lime, or different kinds of lime to the gypsum, or you can add gypsum to lime to gauge your set, what they call gauging plaster, to gauge your set. You can also add glue, which will slow the set down and add some strength to it. So there's a lot of tricks. And even the old timers would talk about putting milk in plaster, putting Coca-Cola in plaster. I mean, all kinds of crazy things, which are, needless to say, are not in the specifications. We don't use them, but there are a lot of old-timer tricks that people who work with this material, understood, the subtleties of the actual materials. Please. Absolutely. Well, when we talk about GFRG, glass reinforced gypsum, we can use those those are types of gypsum, ultracal, hydrocal, hydrostone, are plasters which are manufactured to have specific properties, either very, very hard set or high tensile strength, and absolutely we use them. So the ceiling I showed you in Cleveland was made from using specialty plaster, so we could get very, very thin materials with a lot of strength in them. So absolutely, they have a place. And as I said, it's just understanding the materials. And beyond the world of plasters, which I just described to you, there are, as I said, all of these polymerized and modern materials, Forton, and these kind of things. You need some? No, it's okay. Shoot.
So, you mentioned something falling, so I thought, what is the difference between the work you do in a place like Cleveland versus the work you would do in the Bay Area where earthquakes would be?
Thank you for the segue. Perfect. So, New York Public Library, which we restored in 1993, completely. 2015, we get a call at 7 a.m. in the morning. That medallion, right there, crashed to the floor overnight, crushed a desk, 40 feet. All right? Greene, get over here immediately. What's going on? And so there's the piece that fell. So we work with Jenny Elsner, the engineering firm. They put up a scale. They closed the library. They closed the main reading room of the public library, till we knew what was going on. We determined that there had been a roof hatch that had been left ajar that had allowed water to come in. And it turned into about a year-long process, but we surveyed, and we do this frequently where we do plaster surveys, and we'll go and sound and the entire ceiling, look at it from the back, look how it's installed, and I'll talk a little bit about the traditional installation methods. Came up with methodology, and then went and secured with cable and fasteners maybe 10,000 pieces of plaster on the ceiling. And we've done this at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, Illinois State Capitol, umpteen theaters that where pieces have fallen, and we've gone back in and made sure that they were secure. So the first one I gave you is an example of all the things that go into both new construction and restoration. This is specific to a restoration project, and there is the finished ceiling. I'll show the camera. All right. So we went back and re-secured every piece of ornament, and with both injection methods, and I have another picture here. Yeah. If we have plaster setting, we might have to.
Once we have the plaster, you can see that it's already soaked, and it's not even lumps or anything. You can see the plaster, the consistency of the plaster. So once you see the plaster, you already have it. There's no much you have to do to mix it. It's already plaster. The lumps are already. There's no lump from the plaster. And the setting process starts right now. So remember that I told you about you have 15, 20 minutes. That's when your time starts counting. I can let this preset it up to 15 minutes, and it won't start setting until you do this process right here.
You want to have someone pour one?
How do you know how much water to add, or how much plaster to add?
You see how the plaster is.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see it like you keep adding plaster until you don't see much of the water. You can have to see just barely enough water. That's when you see that consistency on the plaster. Mm-hmm. So just wet your brush, and I'm just gonna help you to pour this real quick. Lightly brush it without getting any clothes.
Because you have to work out all the air bubbles so that you get a good clean mold. Jump in.
So you have to brush it all the way to the.
Yes, you get to push it into all the interstices, all the little parts, and try and get all the air bubbles out. And you'll see we'll shake it a little bit at the end to try and knock air bubbles out as well. Let them pour some. You have some fun. Come on. All right. Here, you need more. Take some more.
You want to let them brush the first one.
And really dab it in so you get it into all the little parts, pieces.
Yes, because the first coat you're doing is removing the air from.
And just so we have a three-ring circus going, don't forget Adam over here who's making this beautiful acanthus scroll. All right.
So another question from the people online is,
Sure.
They're wondering if you're using a repeat
No, because, thank you for bringing that up though. There are different kinds of materials that we can make our molds out of. We're using what we call box molds or production molds. So,
like the surface, try to get that air out of your piece.
so these are silicone molds that we're using.
When you brush it, you see this air bubble. If you don't do the brushing process, you get air bubbles everywhere. So what we're doing first is, don't be afraid. Just if you get it outside, this is part of your mold.
All the way up to here.
Oh, right.
You
We
can
need
get it
more
out.
material.
You just go crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So to answer the question, we don't need a release agent because the silicone will, is smooth enough that the plaster will come right out of it. Traditionally, they used to make the molds out of gelatin. All right. And sometimes what we'll do, if to answer the question, if we have an original piece, let me find something. We'll, yeah. So this piece
You do
is from the original
Yes.
Glendale Airport,
Wash your
first airport in
your-
LA. I think it's 1929, which
We have-
the airport is
yes,
long
because
gone.
The plaster starting getting hard.
Come over here. Disney took the building over, made a design studio out of it, and we restored it. So we have an original piece. What we'll do with this, before we put our, we'll seal it, perhaps with shellac, and then we might use even literally Crisco, spray it, like you would spray a pan if you're frying something, as a release agent. So we'll seal it so it's even with shellac, and then we'll spray something on it. And then there's other subtleties, which I won't get into right now, about whether there's paint. There's a great technique if you have a piece of plaster which has been overpainted many, many, many times, and the detail is gone from it, and you can cut it out like this. So some of these we'll do in situ, but if we can take a piece out and do it in the studio, it's easier to work on. But we could take a piece like this, it's covered in paint, drop it in a bucket of water. The plaster will absorb all the water, won't damage the plaster at all, but all the paint will just jump right off of it.
So you can get that air out.
is much
It's more flat.
easier than trying to strip all the paint off with chemicals and possibly damage the plaster. And the plaster, by the way, is relatively soft. I can cut it with my fingernail. I can make marks in it. So release agent isn't needed for these type of what we call production molds or box molds.
It's
But
enough. But now you
on an
have
original
to-
piece, we might need a release agent.
Around. Yes. You can take the knife and tap the mold around.
Yes.
Now, in terms of the
You can see how the plaster is settling, self-leveling.
You have a process to make this.
Yes, what we'll do is we'll take a prototype piece, whether it's an original or a piece that we've sculpted. So for instance, this, if we wanted to make a mold out of this and a silicone mold, we'd simply build up, and you can see where the holes were, we'll build up walls around it, and then just pour the silicone on top of it
Yes.
until it sets and we get a mold.
Try to run your blade,
How do you do that?
running like in the.
That's what I was describing earlier. So that piece there, we'll paint it on over and over again. That's, yeah. let me find that.
And you do the thing, you just score it
So it's
flat.
relatively thick.
Well, there we are doing a mold in situ. We're
Yeah.
building it up
And then
layer by layer by layer.
Put your
And
blade here.
we did a project recently,
We wait a little
at
bit
a
because
theater
now
in
the
Brooklyn
plaster
called
starts setting
King's,
up and then you get the
where-
plaster expand.
and there's this wonderful sort of cross-pollination between all these various trades, where we found
Wait.
materials that they use in the movie industry in Los Angeles to make special effects, masks and stuff like that, that we were able to use for restoration in architecture, where you can actually spray up the silicone, and it worked fantastic. So there's all this wonderful cross-pollination between all these different fields. To, you can borrow from one industry and apply it somewhere else, and that's very much what happens in conservation all the time. Is that you're borrowing from construction industry, you're borrowing from science, you're borrowing from actually one of the greatest conservation scientists is a guy who used to make soap and shampoo, and he's a genius on how to clean murals because because people are willing to spend money on how to make shampoo and soap. I'm pointing where I don't have any hair. You get it. Anyway, and so there's all this exchange of information between areas that you wouldn't necessarily expect, and that's very much the case also with what I'll call the general world of plaster, but casting of all these materials. And you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah,
process?
We just poured these molds and we did the first brush on coat. So basically what we do in the first coat, we remove the air, make sure that there's enough contact, the plastic is already in every detail. So that's why we use a little brush and we try to keep it clean. And as you do one pass, and then once you have one pass, you just pour the rest. And what we did, just score it with a knife one time. So the plaster, as it's drying, is going to start expand. So a lot of times the plaster started bringing it out of the mold. So what we do, we just babysit the mold and do this process. It started removing the excess every time, like a couple of times, and then your mold is ready.
So the plaster, it gives off heat and it expands as it's setting. And I think I might have said this before, I might have got interrupted. Unlike plaster walls, which are taking oxygen and carbonizing from the air, this is actually creating, if you look at it under a microscope, crystals. And that's why it's setting so quickly.
So how would you do this in place on a ceiling?
If we were to cast pieces on the ceiling, we would not.
Would not. You take it down,
Well,
like if you're restoring something as opposed to.
well, let's talk about that. Thank you for the segue again. And I'm going to jump around a little bit to answer your question in a long-winded way. So if you think about how the originals were done, in the case of the New York Public Library, all those pieces were cast in a workshop like we have. You can see the hessian here. This is the shredded wood material, which, where was that piece with the, you showed me before with the, yeah, there you go. So you can see a little bit of the burlap in the back here, all right? For three-coat plaster, they'll often use chopped hair, like goat hair or horse hair or something like that. Historically, we use a lot of fiberglass now because it won't rot. Part of the problem with any organic material is that if there's moisture, it can literally rot. And so that what's holding that piece in place is these wads over the black iron. So this is a suspended ceiling. So let's talk about ceilings for a second as opposed to walls. It's hung from strapping or sometimes wire. A lot of times as the building settles, those straps will become out unequal tension. So you have to go back. We've done where we have to go back and put turnbuckles in and retension the entire ceiling, or they'll be putting in new ductwork. And we've seen cases where they literally just cut it and the ceiling drops. You can't imagine the things that we've seen, ceilings that have fallen. And so we'll have to put a trapeze in, to transfer the load and rehang the ceiling. But normally, one of the places that it fails is at this wad here, where someone might step on it, or water will get into it, and it'll just rot. And so what we do typically now is we'll put a piece of wire in there, and as we cast these pieces, large pieces in any case, sometimes we'll put an internal armature in them, metal or sometimes wood, and then something that we can physically attach to. So we'll use the traditional method of Dobbs. So in the case of the New York Public Library,
Just put your hands, you feel like
the majority of that ceiling
so we don't get it.
is cast pieces that are then installed on black iron. There are some sections, flat sections, where they used 3-coat plaster. So they'll put in lath, usually expanded metal lath. In older buildings, we have wood lath. We love wood lath because it's really easy to fix. As a rule of thumb, if metal lath is rusted, we cut it out and replace it, because as it rusts, it expands, and it breaks the keys that hold the 3-coat in place. But once you have the 3-coat, then these ornaments, and this is another point of failure, will be buttered on the back and stuck. So I can't think of any circumstances where we would be casting a piece in place. What we might do, if we have some ornament which is deteriorated, we might hand build it in place with plaster. So the process that Adam is going through of carving the plaster, it's actually much easier to carve directly using these sharp tools. I can carve, and we'll get to this when we pull these pieces out. You might have little snots or little things on them. You'll certainly have holes, air pockets, which will need to be filled. And then if there's little places where there's raised things like this, like that right there. See that? I'll just carve it off. Just carve it off there.
So you end up attaching clay, basically, and carving it in place?
No, plaster. So you could, and it's a technique that's used in North Africa and India, where they'll take they'll just run some rough plaster, just a blob of plaster, and then everything will be carved back into it. And actually, when you go to England, and maybe Adam can talk to this, up until about the late 1500s or 1600s, molds were considered a cheap trick. If you were a good stuccatore, you were from Italy or wherever, you carved everything. So entire ceilings were thrown up as plaster and then carved, and that was the real skill. Anybody who would cast it would, what is that? That's like 3D printing. It's, what is that? That's the cheap trick. And by the way, I'll just, since we're on since I mentioned 3D printing, we do use rapid prototyping, 3D printing, and every other tool that's available to us. But what we find is, and I spoke earlier about, the emphasis on the wrong syllable, you have to understand the language and the accent of the type of ornament that you're making. And what happens with most digital assist is that information, that subtlety is lost. And so what we'll do is we'll do rapid prototyping to get a rough up, and then we'll come back and we'll carve it by hand. And we even do this for marble. We just did a cathedra for a bishop in Pennsylvania. We carved an original out of plaster, completely out of plaster, not cast. and then sent it to Italy so it could be read by a computer, carved out of marble, and then finished by hand. So these are all the ways that the techniques that we're talking about are employed, not just for plaster ceilings or walls, but it's part of there's many processes of which these are just a few of the parts. Did I answer your question? Good. While we're waiting for the plaster to set up, I just want to show a few more examples. So, this is King Street Station, Seattle. They put a drop ceiling. You can see where the cables, they just put holes all through the ceiling here, put a drop ceiling underneath here. Absolutely gorgeous ceiling. Then they wanted to retrofit it for seismic compliance and upgrade, which meant taking all the plaster off the walls, putting in new shear walls. We worked on many, many seismic projects where the plaster has to be interrupted. And what we try to do is get involved early on as a consultant to advise them on how to do so that there's minimal impact. We can hold on to as much of the original fabric as possible and keep the cost down, minimize the repairs. So sometimes we have a project right now in Virginia where we just took an entire theater apart, took all the plaster out of the theater so they could do all the structural work, salvaged it. We were involved in that one. And now we'll cast new pieces and take the salvaged parts and put them back. We've actually moved a couple of theaters. There's the Oslo Theater in Sarasota, Florida, which was mysteriously showed up right after the Second World War in Florida. It was stolen from Italy in a 1760s theater. And Italy actually wants their theater back, but now it's in the Ringling Museum in Sarasota. But when they built it in the 1950s, it was an asbestos building. And so we cataloged all the parts, took the theater apart, they tore the building down, got rid of all the asbestos, moved it about 300 yards down the street, built a new building, and we put the theater back together. And we've actually done a number of things where we've moved rooms or moved ceilings. So we have a lot of fun. But in any case, in this case, this is what we were dealt with. We had a lot of new parts to make.
We just let it sit.
Here's an original. Here we are casting, making new parts, and there's the restored ceiling, all put back together, walls and ceiling. So, and no one, you would never know that that this was covered with a drop ceiling and essentially destroyed, and that all the walls have been taken off and put back on for the seismic upgrade. I want to talk about one other project we just finished down in Los Angeles, which is another type of casting. And by the way, this book is hot off the press. I just got my copy on Tuesday of this week. Just came out. It's a sound material. It's all about acoustic solutions, of which we get involved with. I'll just touch on that. We do a lot of work with Star Silent, Boswafon, Fellert. So a lot of the new modern buildings are being built without consideration for what sound reflection is. And that was the case also when, in the 1930s, when the Los Angeles Union Terminal was built. So there were these tiles put on the wall. This is Aquastone, I'm trying to remember. And this is a cast material that we had, and there were broken pieces, and we had to basically match that. So, and Gustavo was a bit of a genius and came up with.
By the way, the original color of the building is right here. All this is dirt and grease from the restaurants they built up over 80 plus years. So the color is the original color.
So there's our replica. And what we had to do is go to, we didn't do petrographic analysis. We have done petrographic analysis where we actually determined what the chemical constituents of the material are. We did that at the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City. In this case, they were mostly interested in the appearance, not so much the acoustical functions anymore. And I can give many other examples where we've had to modify the acoustical properties of the plaster by sealing it or coating it or in conjunction with an acoustician. But in this case, we went to a garden store, and first we tried perlite. It was too sharp. then we found pumice, volcanic ash, was the right, and we had to grade it to the right consistency and find an aggregate that would work, that wouldn't fill the holes. And I can give another anecdotal example of in the Fox Theater in Tucson, Arizona. There was a similar material, but it was done in an entirely different way, where they put bicarbonate of soda in the molds, and when the water from the plaster hit the bicarbonate of soda, it off-gassed and created little holes that created the acoustic, effect of having holes running all through the thing. So there's all kinds of wonderful, weird science and discovery processes involved. We're detectives. When we do the forensic work, in this case, we have to, dive back through the archives, read the old literature, find out what it was made, what it was originally, what they call it. Can we find an old sweets catalog from 1929 or 1930? Play with it relentlessly, try different materials. As I said, go to these other areas, garden supply. Who would have thought, right? But we found what we needed, and we graded it, and we made this, and successfully restored all the surfaces there. So this fits under plaster, but it's a little bit off to the side somewhere. But this is all of our projects. I mean, every single one has these unique challenges. Every project has the specific, you have this body of knowledge of having worked for, in my case, 40 years, that you can, apply to the specific problem. But each one has its own solution, and it's wonderful because everyone is unique, and you're completely engaged in figuring out that problem. So, and for me, I'll also say that it's an endless learning process. I mean, I only have one lifetime, and I will not begin to scratch the surface of all the knowledge of plaster and all the things that can be done with it. I didn't bring any examples, but if anybody's ever heard of scaiola, which is integral colored plaster, which is then made to look like marble. It's a fascinating technique. It took me about 15, 20 years to find someone who was willing to teach me. They all told me, I went to Italy, and they said, it's a secret. We can't tell you. All right, and I experimented relentlessly. And then, of course, now, over the last, let's say, 20 years, it's been the popularity of Venetian plaster, stucco Romano, other kinds of integral colored plaster. These all fall under our purview, although today we're mostly talking about casting. How are we doing with this going on?
Oh, yeah, there's now 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Okay.
So I may have missed it, but the original acoustical tile was you couldn't replace in kind because it was
They stopped
asbestos,
making it
or?
50 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was, long gone, long gone. And actually, lots of different types of acoustic materials had their, 20-year, 30-year heydays, and then they fell out of use. The Guastavino tiles, nobody's making those anymore. We spend a lot of time using the same techniques of what we affectionately call screwing and gluing, which is consolidating the plaster. I wanted to show one on the photograph here. So we consolidate a lot of materials. In this case, there's 3-coat plaster on wood lath. We've drilled holes, and we're injecting it with a consolidant to reattach the broken keys. Here we're using a little syringe to inject consolidants into delamination between the two layers of plaster. And these conservation techniques are, and this is the room at the Park Avenue Armory in New York, Hertier Brothers room from the 1880s. So all of these techniques, and we even use techniques from the medical profession, an IV drip, right? So if we want to add a consolidant to a wall, a solvent consolidant, we will set up a medical drip with a consolidant in it so that it continually saturates the wall and just let it drip into the cavity of the wall in some place. So there's this wonderful cross-pollination of all of these different disciplines and trades. I mean, it's all fair game as far as I'm concerned, where the knowledge is and how to apply it. And so we do a lot of work where we have an existing building, and we have to, figure out how to preserve as much of it as possible so that it's not going to fall on someone's head or it's not dangerous. There's no life safety issues. It has value. People, without ripping it out and replacing it, how can we preserve it? And we do a lot of that through consolidation. And some of the consolidation techniques that we use, there's some fascinating science here I'll just share with you. If the plaster is powdery, and let's say there's been some efflorescence or something like that, we have ways of consolidating it so that it becomes hard again. When we're using techniques where we're injecting, you can put lime in a closed container, and if there's no oxygen from the air, it won't cure, it won't set, all right? So liquid coke from the iron industry, in combination with calcium carbonate, off-gases oxygen. So you can use Roplex, which is a polymer, with micro balloons, little spherical man-made balloons that are smaller than sand, as a bulk filler, with lime and liquid coke, and you can adjust the viscosity and the thickness of it, so you can get it into these holes in a cavity in a wall. And what we'll do is we'll inject a pre-wetting agent to diminish the surface tension, and surfactant, and then inject it with these materials that off-gas inside the wall and harden and will solidify two surfaces that are otherwise where you have, let's say, blind cleavage. So I mean, figuring this stuff out is I can't tell you how much fun it is. I mean, it's like, but you have to go and talk to different people and get from different industries and have an open mind that it's not just about making plaster. It's about these rudimentary techniques, which I'm talking about, that have been around for literally hundreds of years and have evolved, and I would say are continuing to evolve, so that for our times right now, we're at I don't want to say crossroads, but at a juncture where a lot of the old craftsmen, the knowledge is not being passed on, but it's being augmented by the science which I'm telling you about, which is probably Morgan Phillips was the one who came up with plaster consolidation probably in the 80s. So 30 years old, maybe something like that. So there are new techniques, but how to keep the old ones alive and combine the two? And that's the challenge. And apply them to preserve our buildings. You think we're ready?
I think we're ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you all like to?
Wanna come and give me the order? Just pick up the whole. Okay, you want to get another set of gloves? Yes, yes.
And Adam didn't know that we were going to put him to work here, but you can come and see the process. Not bad. Yeah.
No, just get anyone. Get anyone.
That was, yes, making up my head. This is the sort of model I would typically make for a wood carver. I have a wood carver. So this is a slower level of finish I would get to before certain pieces.
And yes, try pick it up. The more pick it up and try to like you feel in a.
Fine detail and more precise casting. Starting from that. You know.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And he
very much on the spot as well. Thanks, Jeff.
he did not know he was going to do this. He came to see the demonstration. We put him to work, right? So, but here's a man who understands where that accent belongs and how, all the different styles. So that, having a simple acanthus leaf like this, it could be done as a Gothic acanthus leaf. It could be done as a Victorian acanthus leaf. It could be done as a neoclassical, a more classical. It's the same leaf.
Yeah.
It's the same form, but how do you do it so the style matches? And if you have a good eye, if you train yourself, and all of this stuff, the knowledge is just a matter of looking. It's just a matter of looking, going to beautiful buildings and looking at them and understanding simply by looking what makes sense.
This would be a sort of typical 18th century Rococo, mid 18th century Rococo C scroll. So you wouldn't see this in Gothic ornament, or you would in Victorian ornament in neo Rococo. But anyway, it's specific to this. So this would go with it. And kind of giving it a sort of English treatment rather than the nuances that you see in French work as opposed to then you get to, as Dave
German
said, you get to
work,
train German work, exactly.
Yeah,
You get to
Scandinavian,
train
Russian.
your eye as you know, and hone it down so that you can really see the peculiarities between each, you know, traditional treatment, the treatment of the design. Yeah.
So is the clay oil or water-based? It was a
This
question
is,
from online.
non-drying. So this is plasticine, basically. You can just, it'll stay wet forever. So I think we're ready to demold.
Yes, let's go to this. I want to give it a
You get 5 minutes left in time.
Okay.
It's probably broke because we didn't put any reinforcement in.
Yeah, also that,
But it's very, very soft. And by the way, it's
this part of this is fully in the because when you speak this, this one is fully in. So when you're doing big quantity of mold, you want to make your time in your. That's what we use. Fully. Around and kept working on it.
Is this Caroline's piece?
Yes.
It is? Okay. So if you want to.
So I don't have a job as a.
This was an
We'll give
audition.
this one.
We were trying to find some new help here, right?
We'll give you that one.
I failed the interview.
No, actually, the teacher. If you want to, actually, it's not a bad. No. If you want to, see that little thing right there?
Mhm.
You can take this and just carve it real soft right now, so you can get any of your imperfections out. If you wanted, really beautiful mold. If there's anything that, and by the same token, if there's any air pockets, which I don't see any, so you did actually do a very, very good job there. You can clean up all these edges here, just cut those off. Yeah. See, it comes right off.
Yeah.
But if there were air pockets, you take a little bit of the soft material and go in and fill those. You've got actually it's a small air pocket right at the edge there, and here this
Right
one's
there,
yeah. So that there you go. Do we have any soft material? Everything's hard.
Right here a little bit.
If you want to, you can. It's still soft enough.
Mhm.
Just so what you'll do is just fill that in, and then use this
Mhm.
to carve it back out again.
Oh, okay.
Got it? It's just craft. Yeah.
Yeah.
The art is in knowing what it should be. The vocabulary and the rest of it is a different skill. It's a craftsman's skill,
Mhm.
right? That's what I would consider.
Would you find that most of your workers come more from a material science and conservation background nowadays? It seems that tradesmen in general is that.
Well, thank you for bringing that up because it's actually, we have about 200 people working right now, so we're a large organization, and they do not come from one place or another. So we have people who are trained in the old world, come from Europe, former Russian, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Bulgaria, Lithuania, etc., who were trained in traditionally. So that's a certain portion of people. Then there are people who have master's degrees in preservation or preservation science. They bring a different sensibility. Sometimes they have the hands. There are people who come from an artistic background, and there are people who come through the trades. And all of those people bring a different sensibility. And when they all work together, there's an exchange. And, as they say, the high tide raises all boats. So it's kind of wonderful that, it's not just one sensibility or another. So someone might be interested in the historical preservation, the history, and might go back and read the text or go through old catalogs and find things. Someone might understand very well the style. Someone else might understand the materials very well. But they all have something to share and exchange with one another.
So it's
Yes, it's a heat, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I had a quick follow-up question that follows on what you just said, but one of the bullet points on the agenda was about the Secretary of Interior standards and how you would sort of apply those standards in the context of plaster. I guess repairing and replacing in kind, those kinds of things, and compatibility versus differentiation. So how would you differentiate something that's a replacement or an addition? I'm not sure how.
There's, how to answer that question. That's a tricky one. I think it all depends upon, there's a lot of latitude in the interpretation of the standards. And I find that in Europe, there's a different sensibility about what preservation means. So, and we are also sort of evolving, I'll say, in our interpretation. So the idea of modern materials, being able to distinguish them, it all depends upon, I think there's not a set answer, because it depends upon what the object is. And I mean, when I say object, I mean building, architecture, how it's interpreted, right? So what are the defining features? And I'll give you an example. We've worked on many projects where they put up blue board, and put a veneer on, and for all the world, it looks like plaster. You tap it, you do not know that it's not plaster. And that would satisfy the Secretary of the Standards Interior of requirements. But, is it good preservation or not? It's an economic, why do they go that way? Life safety always comes first, but if you have a revered object, I mean, something that's irreplaceable, not just, so, there's only one of these, right? And